The first bottle smashed against the back of Bobby Dukes' skull at 9:47 on a Thursday night, spraying brown glass across the bar counter and opening a gash that ran from his left ear down to his collar. Bobby didn't fall. He turned around slow, beer foam and blood mixing down his neck, and he looked at the three men standing behind him with the kind of calm that made the bartender reach under the counter for the phone. What happened in the next 72 hours would become rural Alabama legend. A story whispered about for decades in biker bars, VFW halls, and courtrooms from Mobile to Montgomery. But we got to go back. Just a little. Bobby Dukes was 340 pounds. Not the gym kind, the kind where your belt disappears and your knees hurt when it rains. He rode a reinforced Harley Electra Glide with custom springs because stock suspension couldn't handle him. He'd been a patched member of the Hells Angels out of the Nomad chapter for 11 years, and in those 11 years he'd earned a reputation as the guy you sent when a problem needed to go away quiet. Not because he was violent, because he was precise. Here's what nobody tells you about Bobby Dukes. Before the motorcycle club, before the leather vest and the road name and the belly, Bobby had been Sergeant First Class Robert Allen Dukes, United States Army, attached to the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, Georgia. He'd done 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He'd been a designated marksman, which is the Army's polite way of saying he killed people from very far away. His confirmed count was 41. His unconfirmed count was a number he never shared with anyone, not his ex-wife, not his chapter president, not the VA therapist he saw exactly once before walking out mid-session. The Army had given him a Bronze Star and a Combat Infantryman badge and then spit him back into civilian life with a bag of prescriptions and a handshake. That was 2009. By 2016, Bobby was living outside Cullman, Alabama, in a double-wide on 4 acres of nothing. He worked part-time at a diesel repair shop. He rode with his brothers on weekends. He drank Budweiser from cans, not bottles, because bottles reminded him of something he didn't talk about. He was, by every external measure, a fat biker with a bad back and a talent for keeping to himself. And that's exactly what the Klan saw when they looked at him. Now listen. The Ku Klux Klan in Alabama in 2016 wasn't the Burning Cross 1,000-man army of the 1960s. Those days were gone. What remained were pockets, cells, small groups of men with bad teeth and worse ideas who met in barns and garages and convinced themselves they were soldiers in a race war that existed mostly in their own skulls. The chapter operating in Cullman County called itself the Knights of the Southern Cross, which sounded grand until you realized it was 9 guys, 3 of whom were related, led by a 44-year-old plumber named Dale Ray Wiggins. Dale Ray was the kind of man who needed to feel big, 5'8", 160 pounds, talked non-stop, wore a sidearm to the grocery store and told anyone who'd listen that the country was being stolen from real Americans. He had a felony assault conviction from 2003 that he'd gotten knocked down to a misdemeanor through a plea deal, and he'd been building his little militia ever since. Believe me, I've looked into this guy. Dale Ray wasn't stupid, that was the problem. Stupid would have been safer. Dale Ray had a plan. For 3 years he'd been expanding what he called his territory, which meant intimidating anyone who wasn't white, Christian, and born within 50 miles of Cullman. He'd run a black family out of a rental property on Route 278 by slashing their tires 3 nights in a row and leaving a note. He'd spray-painted a swastika on a Mexican grocery store in Decatur. Small acts, coward acts, the kind of stuff that made local news for one day and then disappeared. But in early 2016, Dale Ray got ambitious. He decided the Hells Angels were a problem. Specifically, he decided that the Angels' willingness to associate with non-white motorcycle clubs made them race traitors. Get this, the Hells Angels, an organization that has had its own very well-documented issues with race, were somehow not racist enough for Dale Ray Wiggins. And Bobby Dukes, the fat one, the loner who lived out on County Road 1699, the one who rode alone most days because his chapter brothers were spread across 3 states. Bobby was the easiest target. Dale Ray said it at a meeting. His cousin Travis would later testify to this in court. Dale Ray stood up in Wayne Posey's barn, looked at his 8 followers and said, That fat boy on the Harley, he's got no backup out here. No crew, just a gut and a motorcycle. We run him out, it sends a message. The angels won't come to Culman for one guy. 3 of his men laughed. They should have run. The first contact came on a Tuesday. Bobby was at the diesel shop, lying under a Peterbilt with a wrench in his hand, when a black Dodge Ram pulled into the lot and 2 men got out. They didn't come inside. They stood by the truck, arms crossed, and waited. Bobby's co-worker, a kid named Marcus, walked out to ask if they needed help. One of the men, later identified as Ricky Sims, told Marcus to go get the fat biker. Marcus came back inside. "Bobby, couple guys out there asking for you." Bobby slid out from under the truck. He wiped his hands on a rag. He walked to the bay door and looked out at the 2 men standing next to the Ram. He studied their boots, their belt lines, the way the taller one kept his right hand near his hip. Bobby had a way of scanning people that most civilians wouldn't notice. It wasn't a look. It was an inventory. He walked out. "Help you? You Bobby Dukes?" "Who's asking?" "Friends. We're friends of the community. Just wanted to let you know that your kind of club isn't welcome around here anymore. I swear this happened." Bobby looked at the 2 of them for about 5 seconds. Then he turned around and walked back into the shop. Didn't say a word, didn't engage, didn't puff up or throw a threat. Just turned his back and went back to work. Ricky Sims took that as weakness. And that's where the math started going wrong for everybody involved. The second contact came 4 days later, and it wasn't polite. Bobby came out of the Piggly Wiggly on a Saturday morning with 2 grocery bags and found a note tucked under the seat of his Harley. The note was handwritten. It said, "Leave or bleed." There was a crude drawing of a cross underneath. Bobby read it. He folded it. He put it in his vest pocket. He loaded his groceries into his saddlebag and rode home. But here's the thing. When Bobby got home, he didn't throw the note away. He didn't call the cops. He didn't call his chapter president. He walked into his back bedroom, the one he kept locked, the one Marcus had never seen inside, and he opened a gun safe that weighed more than he did. What Bobby Dukes kept in that safe would have made a Special Forces Armory sergeant take a step back. 2 M24 sniper rifles, both modified. One suppressed, a Barrett M82 anti-materiel rifle that he'd purchased legally through a Class 3 dealer in Birmingham. 4 handguns, a Remington 870 shotgun, and in the bottom drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, a set of night vision optics that he'd bought from a buddy who'd separated from JSOC and had, let's say, a flexible relationship with government property. Bobby took out the night vision optics and set them on his kitchen table. He took out the suppressed M24 and laid it beside them. Then he sat down with a can of Budweiser and a map of his property that he'd drawn himself, with distances marked in meters at 50-meter intervals out to 900. He didn't look angry. His jaw was loose, his breathing was even. He drank his beer. That's what scared people about Bobby Dukes when they finally understood what they were dealing with. There was no rage, no adrenaline display. He processed a threat the way a calculator processes a math problem. Input, output, solution. For the next week, nothing happened. Bobby went to work. Bobby rode his Harley. Bobby drank at the Rusty Spur on Wednesday and Friday nights, which was his routine, and he talked to the same people he always talked to. And nobody noticed anything different about him except that he'd started parking his bike, where he could see it from whatever seat he chose. Dale Ray noticed the quiet. He took it as confirmation. The fat biker was scared. Now I need to tell you something about Dale Ray's operation because it matters for what comes next. Dale Ray had access to a piece of property about 12 miles outside of Culman proper, a 100-acre tract owned by Wayne Posey's family since the 1940s. Posey's farm. That's where they met. That's where they stored their weapons, which were mostly AR-15 variants and deer rifles. And that's where Dale Ray had started running what he called training exercises. These training exercises were a joke. Trust me on this. 9 guys walking through woods in camouflage, shooting at paper targets from 30 yards, playing soldier. None of them had military experience. The closest any of them had come to combat was Ricky Sims's 3 months in the Army Reserve before he washed out during basic training for failing a PT test. But they had guns, and they had Dale Ray's confidence. And confidence, when it's not backed by competence, is the most dangerous substance on earth. On a Friday night in March, Bobby was at the Rusty Spur. He was 2 beers in watching a Braves spring training game on the TV above the bar when 3 men walked in. Dale Ray Wiggins, Travis Wiggins, and a man Bobby hadn't seen before, later identified as Paul Sheehan, a welder from Decatur who joined Dale Ray's group 6 months earlier. They sat down at a table near the door. They ordered beers. They were loud about it. Dale Ray kept looking at Bobby and laughing, saying things to Travis that Bobby couldn't hear over the television. Bobby didn't look at them. The bartender, a woman named Donna Marsh, noticed the tension immediately. She would later describe it to the Cullman County Sheriff's Office as watching somebody poke a sleeping dog with a stick, except the dog was the size of a refrigerator. 20 minutes passed. Dale Ray got up. He walked to the bar. He sat down on the stool next to Bobby, close enough that their elbows almost touched. "You get my note?" Bobby took a drink of his beer. "Set it down. I asked you a question, fat boy." Bobby turned his head. He looked at Dale Ray Wiggins the way you'd look at a stain on your shirt, not with anger, with mild inconvenience. "I got it." And what?" Dale Ray leaned in. "And when are you leaving?" Bobby picked up his beer again. He took a long pull. He set it down and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he said, quietly, so only Dale Ray could hear, "I'm not going anywhere, Dale. But if you put another note on my bike, I'm going to find out where you sleep." Dale Ray's jaw tightened. You could see the muscles in his neck cord up. He was not accustomed to being spoken to with that level of flat dismissal. He was accustomed to people getting scared, getting angry, getting reactive. Bobby had given him nothing. No heat, no handle to grab. Dale Ray stood up. He knocked Bobby's beer over on purpose, spilling it across the bar counter. Bobby didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't look down at the spreading puddle. "We'll see," Dale Ray said. He walked back to his table, collected his boys, and left. Donna Marsh came over with a rag and a fresh beer. "Bobby, you okay?" Bobby took the fresh beer. "Thank you, Donna." That was all he said. But when Bobby left the bar that night, he didn't go home the way he usually went home. He took a different route. He took the long way, down County Road 1699, the back way, and when he got to his property, he killed his headlight a quarter mile out and rolled in dark. He parked the Harley in his garage and locked it. Then he went to his back bedroom, and he took out the night vision optics, and he sat on his back porch for 3 hours, scanning his property line. At 2:14 in the morning, he saw a truck parked on the dirt road that bordered his north fence line. It was there for 40 minutes. Then it left. They were watching him. Bobby wrote down the time and the direction the truck went. He wrote it in a small green notebook, the same kind he'd used for range logs in the Army. Date, time, bearing, description, duration of contact. Old habits. He did this for the next 5 nights. Every night, the truck came. Sometimes it was the black Dodge Ram. Sometimes it was a white Ford F-150 with a cracked taillight. They were running surveillance on him. Amateur surveillance, sure, but surveillance. On the 6th night, Bobby didn't sit on the porch. He put on dark clothes and his old combat boots, the ones that still fit because feet don't get fat, and he moved through his own property to the north fence line. He lay prone in the tall grass, 50 meters from the dirt road, and he waited with his night vision optics. The white Ford showed up at 1:30 a.m., 2 men inside, engine running, window cracked. Bobby could see the orange glow of a cigarette in the passenger seat. For the record, this is where Bobby Dukes did something that most people in his position would never think to do. He took photographs. He'd brought a camera with an infrared-compatible lens, another toy from his JSOC buddy, and he photographed the truck, the plate, the 2 occupants, and the direction they came from and left in. He did this without moving from his position. He did it without making a sound. He did it from 50 meters away in total darkness while lying flat on his stomach in wet grass. He was 41 years old and 340 pounds, and he moved through that grass without disturbing a single blade, more than the wind would have. Some things the body remembers even when the belly forgets. Now, you're probably wondering why Bobby didn't just call the cops. Fair question. Here's the answer, and you can decide for yourself whether it's a good one. Bobby Dukes didn't trust the police, not because he was a criminal. His record was clean, not even a traffic ticket since his discharge. He didn't trust them because he'd grown up in rural Alabama, and he knew how things worked. The Cullman County Sheriff's Department had exactly 19 deputies covering an area the size of Rhode Island. Response time to Bobby's property was 45 minutes on a good night, and Bobby had heard, through Donna at the bar, through Marcus at the shop, through the quiet network of people who pay attention, that at least 2 of Dale Ray's guys had family connections to local law enforcement. Was that true? Maybe, maybe not. But Bobby operated on worst-case scenarios. That's what the Army had trained him to do. So Bobby built his own intelligence file. He documented every visit. He identified the trucks. He ran the plates through a buddy who worked at a used car lot and had access to vehicle registration databases through his dealer account. He mapped Dale Ray's movements by spending his lunch breaks parked at different intersections in Cullman, watching, noting times and patterns. Within 2 weeks, Bobby Dukes knew more about the Knights of the Southern Cross than the FBI field office in Birmingham. He knew there were 9 members. He knew their names. He knew where they worked. He knew that they met at Posey's farm on alternate Saturdays. He knew that Dale Ray drove a silver Chevy Silverado and that he left his house on Mulberry Street every morning at 7:15 to drive to his plumbing jobs. He knew that Travis Wiggins had a girlfriend in Huntsville and spent Tuesday and Thursday nights there. He knew that Ricky Sims drank at a bar called the Wagon Wheel on weeknights and was usually drunk by 10 p.m. Bobby put all of this in his green notebook. He didn't share it with anyone. He went to work. He rode his bike. He drank at the Rusty Spur. He played the part. No kidding. This man was running a one-man reconnaissance operation against a domestic terror cell out of a double-wide trailer, and nobody around him had the slightest idea. Then Dale Ray escalated. On a Monday morning in April, Bobby walked out to his garage and found his Harley on its side. The gas tank had been dented with something heavy, maybe a baseball bat. The mirrors were snapped off, the ignition wires had been cut. And on the garage floor, sprayed in red paint, was a single word. Bobby stood in the garage doorway. He looked at his motorcycle. That Harley was the most expensive thing he owned. He'd rebuilt the engine himself. He'd installed the custom springs, adjusted the suspension, tuned the carburetor. It was his, and they'd violated it. Something changed in Bobby's face. Donna Marsh wasn't there to see it. Marcus wasn't there. Nobody was. But if you could have watched him in that moment, you would have seen a man's posture shift. Not dramatically, not a clenched fist or a thrown object. His shoulders came back about half an inch, his chin dropped a fraction. His eyes, which were normally a little sleepy, a little distant, went absolutely flat. He walked back into the house. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus and told him he wouldn't be in today. Then he sat down at his kitchen table and opened his green notebook to a fresh page. At the top of the page, he wrote a single word: plan. Let me stop here and tell you something about what was happening in Bobby's head, because it matters. Bobby Dukes had spent 3 years in combat zones watching people die. He'd spent months lying in concealed positions, controlling his breathing, waiting for a target to step into his crosshairs. He had killed men at ranges that most recreational shooters can't even see clearly. And every single one of those kills had been preceded by this exact process: observation, identification, planning, execution. Bobby wasn't getting angry. Bobby was going operational. And here is the exact moment. Right here, April of 2016, Bobby Dukes sitting at a kitchen table in a double-wide in Cullman County with a green notebook and a destroyed Harley in his garage, where this story stops being about a biker being harassed and starts being about something else entirely, because Bobby made a decision. He was not going to kill them. That's important. He was not going to go to war. He was going to do something worse. He was going to let them come to him, on his ground, on his terms, and he was going to show them what they had walked into. He was going to dismantle their confidence so completely that they would never feel safe again. Bobby's plan had 3 phases. He didn't call them phases, he called them steps. But when investigators later reconstructed his actions, they used the word phases, because what Bobby Dukes executed over the next 2 weeks was structurally identical to a military operation. Step 1. Deny the enemy information. Bobby stopped going to the Rusty Spur. He stopped parking his Harley at the diesel shop. He got it repaired and kept it in the locked garage. He varied his routes to work. He left at different times. He came home at different times. He removed every predictable pattern from his daily life. Dale Ray noticed. His watchers reported that the fat biker had changed his routine. Dale Ray interpreted this as fear. "He's running scared," Dale Ray told his guys at the next Saturday meeting. "Time to finish it." That was the second time Dale Ray stated his core belief, by the way. The belief that Bobby Dukes was a soft target, a coward, a man whose size was his only feature and whose isolation made him prey. Dale Ray would state this belief one more time, just once more, and it would be the last thing he believed before his entire world collapsed. Step 2. Demonstrate capability. This is where things get wild. On a Wednesday night, 3 days after his Harley was destroyed, Travis Wiggins walked out of his girlfriend's apartment in Huntsville at 11:45 p.m. He got in his truck, a blue GMC Sierra. He started the engine. He reached for his seatbelt. And he froze. On his dashboard, placed neatly in the center where it couldn't be missed, was a photograph. The photograph showed Travis Wiggins sleeping, in his own bed, in his own house, taken from a distance of approximately 6 feet. Travis did not call the police. He called Dale Ray. He was hyperventilating when he made the call. Dale Ray told him to calm down, to drive to Posey's farm to bring the photograph. Travis drove to Posey's farm at 80 miles an hour with every light in his truck on and his 380 on the seat beside him. "Here's what's coming, and I want you to pay attention." The next morning, Ricky Sims walked out to his truck and found the same thing, a photograph on his dashboard. This one showed Ricky sitting at the bar at the wagon wheel, taken from outside through the front window. The angle was high, slightly downward, consistent with someone positioned in an elevated location across the street. On the back of the photograph, in neat handwriting, was a set of numbers, 217 meters. Ricky didn't know what the numbers meant, but he felt something cold move through his chest when he read them. 217 meters was the distance from the rooftop of the hardware store across from the wagon wheel to Ricky's favorite bar stool, a sniper's distance measurement. Bobby had signed his message in a language only a shooter would understand. And when Dale Ray finally figured it out, and he did figure it out, because even Dale Ray could type 217 meters sniper into a search engine, the reaction was not what you'd expect. Dale Ray didn't back off. Dale Ray got angry. This is the part most people don't understand about men like Dale Ray Wiggins. When a man builds his entire identity around being dangerous, around being the threat, around being the one who controls the fear, he cannot process becoming the one who is afraid. The fear doesn't make him cautious. It makes him furious. It makes him reckless. It makes him escalate precisely when any rational person would retreat. Dale Ray called an emergency meeting. All 9 members. That Saturday at Posey's farm. Now here is something truly remarkable, and I need you to understand the level of operational skill we're talking about. Bobby Dukes knew about the emergency meeting. He knew the day, the time, and the number of attendees, because Bobby had, at some point during the previous week, placed a listening device under the bench seat on Wayne Posey's front porch, where Dale Ray liked to sit and make his phone calls. Bobby had purchased the device online for $47. He monitored it from his truck, parked in a turnout on a logging road 1.3 miles from Posey's property, using a receiver he'd built from components he ordered from 3 different websites. A 340-pound Hell's Angel was running signals intelligence on a clan cell from a truck in the woods, with equipment that cost less than a decent pair of boots. Let that sit for a second. At the emergency meeting, Dale Ray laid out his position. He said the biker was trying to intimidate them. He said they outnumbered him 9-1. He said a fat man with a camera wasn't the same as a real threat. He said they were going to hit Bobby's property, all 9 of them, armed, and they were going to burn his garage with his Harley inside it and beat him badly enough that he'd never come back. He set the date for the following Friday. Late, midnight, or after. Bobby heard every word. And Bobby began step 3, prepare the ground. You need to understand Bobby's property to understand what happened next. 4 acres, flat in the front near the road, rising to a gentle hill behind the trailer, then dropping off into a wooded creek bed at the back of the property. The north side bordered the dirt road where the trucks had been watching him. The south side bordered an empty lot that belonged to an estate and hadn't been maintained in years. The east side was dense tree line. The west side was open, facing County Road 1699. Bobby spent the next 4 days modifying his property. He didn't build traps. He didn't set explosives. He didn't dig punji pits or string wire. What Bobby Dukes did was far more sophisticated and far more terrifying. He created lanes. In military terminology, a lane is a pathway that channels an enemy's movement. You block certain routes, you leave others open, and you position yourself so that the open routes lead directly into your field of fire. It's the sniper's version of architecture. You don't chase the enemy. You let the terrain bring the enemy to you. Bobby used his tractor to push dead tree branches and brush into piles that blocked the east tree line and the south lot approach. Not obvious barriers. Natural-looking debris. He parked his truck at an angle near the front of the property that narrowed the western approach. He left the north side, the dirt road side, wide open. He wanted them to come from the north, because 50 meters south of the north fence line, sitting on the gentle rise behind his trailer, was a position Bobby had been building and improving for 6 years. A reinforced shooting platform, hidden under a lean-to that looked like a junk pile, with clear sight lines to every inch of the northern approach. He'd ranged every reference point, every fence post, every tree, every rock. He knew the distance to within a meter. That shooting platform was where Bobby intended to be on Friday night. But Bobby didn't plan to shoot anyone. And this is the part of the story that separates Bobby Dukes from every revenge fantasy you've ever heard. Bobby Dukes had killed 41 men in combat. He knew what killing did. He knew what it cost. He knew the sound a man makes when a 308 round hits him in the chest from 400 meters, and he had decided, clearly and deliberately, that he was done making that sound happen. His plan was different. His plan was psychological. His plan was to break them without firing a single round. And honestly, what he did was worse. Friday came. Bobby ate dinner early. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can. He washed his plate. He fed his dog, an ancient beagle named Sergeant who'd been with him for 9 years. He let Sergeant out, then back in, then locked the dog in the bedroom with a bowl of water and the television on low. Then Bobby Dukes went to work. He dressed in dark clothing. He applied face paint, the same woodland pattern he'd used in Afghanistan, mixed from commercial hunting camouflage sticks he'd bought at Bass Pro Shop. He pulled on his boots. He checked his equipment. What he carried that night, the suppressed M24 rifle, loaded with 5 rounds, the night vision optics, head-mounted, a handheld spotlight with a 1,000,000 candle power beam, a megaphone, a cell phone with the Coleman County Sheriff's non-emergency number programmed in, and a small digital recorder, no body armor, no sidearm. At 340 pounds, Bobby moved slower than he used to, and he decided that weight was weight and he'd rather have mobility than protection. He was in position by 10 p.m., prone on the shooting platform, night vision on, rifle on the bipod, scope zeroed. The spotlight was beside him, along with the megaphone. The recorder was in his chest pocket already running. And then Bobby Dukes did what Bobby Dukes did better than almost any living person on Earth. He waited. He waited for 2 hours and 14 minutes without moving. His breathing was slow and controlled, 4 counts in, 4 counts out. His heart rate, if anyone could have measured it, would have been around 58 beats per minute, the same heart rate a sleeping person would have. Bobby's body had been trained to treat moments of extreme danger as moments of extreme stillness, and that training had never left him. At 12:14 a.m., headlights appeared on the dirt road to the north. 2 trucks, moving slow, headlights dimmed. They parked where the surveillance trucks had parked, along the fence line about 100 meters from Bobby's position. Doors opened. Bobby counted through his night vision. 9 men, just as planned. They were carrying rifles. 2 of them had shotguns. 1 had what appeared to be a gasoline can. They gathered at the fence. Dale Ray was in front, recognizable even in the green wash of the night vision by his height and his constant hand gestures. He was giving instructions. Bobby couldn't hear the words at this distance, but he didn't need to. He knew the plan. He'd heard it 4 days ago. The 9 men climbed over the fence. They spread out in a loose line, maybe 20 meters wide, and began moving south toward Bobby's trailer. They were walking directly into the lane Bobby had built. They were 70 meters from his position. Then 60. Then 50. Bobby Dukes took one long, slow breath. Then he turned on the spotlight. 1,000,000 candle power hit those 9 men like a wall of white fire. After 45 minutes of moving in darkness, their pupils were fully dilated. The light didn't just blind them, it physically hurt. Men threw their hands up. Men stumbled. 2 of them dropped to the ground. Ricky Sims screamed, actually screamed a high panicked sound that cut through the night air. Before a single one of them could recover, Bobby keyed the megaphone. His voice boomed across the field, deep and impossibly calm. "You are in a designated fire zone. I have a scoped rifle trained on every one of you. You have 10 seconds to drop your weapons and put your faces in the dirt, or I will begin eliminating targets from left to right." 10, 9, 8. He didn't get to 7. Weapons hit the ground. Men went flat, every single one of them. 9 armed men, some of whom had spent months telling each other they were warriors, went face down in the grass in under 4 seconds. All except Dale Ray. Dale Ray stood there, blinded, squinting into the spotlight. His rifle was still in his hands. His whole body was shaking, not from cold, but from the sudden and total understanding that he had walked into something he did not control and could not escape. His fingers were wrapped around the stock of his AR-15, and his knuckles were white and his legs were locked, and he was breathing in short, harsh gasps that Bobby could hear through the still night air. Bobby watched him through the scope. Dale Ray's chest filled the crosshairs. Bobby's finger was outside the trigger guard, resting on the receiver, where it would stay. "Dale," Bobby said through the megaphone, not shouting now. "Conversational. Put it down." Dale Ray's mouth moved. No sound came out. "I can see your heartbeat through this scope, Dale. I can see the vein in your neck pulsing. You are 104 pounds of trigger pull away from not existing anymore. Put the rifle down." Dale Ray dropped the rifle. His legs gave out. He sat down hard in the grass, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and he put his hands on top of his head. And here's where Bobby Dukes did the thing that turned this story from a standoff into a legend. He stood up. He turned off the night vision. He picked up the spotlight and aimed it at himself, illuminating his own position, his own body, his own face. 340 pounds, camo paint, the suppressed rifle slung across his chest. He wanted them to see him. He wanted them to know exactly who they'd been hunting. Then he walked down the hill toward them, slowly, not rushing. The spotlight in one hand, the megaphone in the other, every step deliberate, every step visible. He walked right up to where Dale Ray was sitting in the grass. He stood over him. Dale Ray looked up. The Klansman's face was streaked with dirt and sweat and something that might have been tears, and his eyes were wide, and in that moment he was not a plumber or a leader or a white supremacist. He was a man who had just realized at a cellular level that he had been playing a game that someone else had already won before it started. Bobby looked down at him, and Bobby said, quiet, without the megaphone, just his own voice in the dark, "I was never the prey." 6 words. Under 15. The night went silent. Even the insects seemed to pause. Bobby pulled out his phone. He called the Coleman County Sheriff's Department and reported 9 armed trespassers on his property. He gave his address, his name, and a calm description of the situation. He told the dispatcher that all 9 subjects were disarmed and prone, and that he would be standing by his front porch when deputies arrived. Then Bobby Dukes walked to his front porch, sat down in a lawn chair, and waited. The deputies arrived in 37 minutes. They found 9 men lying in the grass. They found 9 rifles and shotguns on the ground. They found a gasoline can. They found Dale Ray Wiggins sitting with his hands on his head, not speaking, staring at nothing. All 9 were arrested. The charges ranged from criminal trespass to attempted arson to making terroristic threats. Dale Ray Wiggins was charged with conspiracy to commit arson and intimidation, along with a weapons charge related to his prior felony that his old plea deal couldn't protect him from anymore. But the real damage wasn't legal. The real damage was the story, because Bobby had been recording everything. The audio from that night, Bobby's countdown, the weapons hitting the ground, Dale Ray's silence, Bobby's 6 words, was picked up by a local reporter named Christine Avery, who covered the arrests. She didn't publish the audio. She didn't need to. She published the story, and the story was enough. A Klan cell had targeted a lone biker. The lone biker turned out to be a decorated combat sniper, with 41 confirmed kills. The Klan cell had walked into a prepared kill zone and been neutralized without a single shot fired. The story went regional, then national, then viral, not because of the politics, not because of the racial angle, though that was part of it. The story went viral because of the image, a 340-pound man on a Harley, underestimated by everyone who looked at him, turning out to be the most dangerous person within 100 miles. If this story is hitting different, take a second and hit subscribe. I promise you what happens next is worth staying for. When the story broke, people started coming to Bobby. Reporters, filmmakers, podcast producers. A literary agent from New York called the Diesel Shop asking for him. A cable network offered him a reality show deal. Bobby said no to all of it. Every single offer. He told Marcus to stop giving out his phone number. He told Donna at the Rusty Spur that if anyone came in asking about him, she should tell them he'd moved to Florida. But the attention brought something Bobby didn't expect. Other veterans reached out. Not through the media. Through the network. The quiet chain of phone numbers and introductions that connects men who've served in certain units and done certain things. A former ranger in Huntsville called him. A retired Marine Scout sniper in Tuscaloosa sent him a letter, an actual paper letter handwritten. A woman who'd served as a combat medic in Kandahar drove to the Diesel Shop and asked Marcus if she could talk to Bobby for 5 minutes. Bobby talked to her for 2 hours. They sat on the tailgate of her truck and drank coffee from a thermos and talked about things that neither of them had talked about in years. The medic's name was Karen Griswold, and she told Bobby that she'd been following the story and that she wanted him to know something. "You could have killed every one of them," she said. "Yes. And you chose not to." Bobby looked at his hands. They were big hands, rough from diesel work, with a tremor in the left one that he'd had since Afghanistan. He looked at those hands, and then he looked at Karen Griswold, and he said, "I didn't want to have any more faces." Karen nodded. She understood what that meant. The faces that come when you close your eyes. The faces that live behind your eyelids and never leave. 41 faces. More than 41. Bobby had chosen not to add to the collection. That was the moment of vulnerability. The big man, the legend, the sniper who turned a Klan ambush into a humiliation. And beneath all of it, a man who was tired of seeing dead people when he tried to sleep. Now here's where the legal side gets interesting. And I'll keep it tight because the courtroom isn't where this story lives. But you need to know what happened. Dale Ray Wiggins took a plea deal. He pled guilty to conspiracy and criminal trespass in exchange for dropping the arson charge. He got 4 years in state prison, of which he'd served 2 and change with good behavior. Travis Wiggins, Ricky Sims, and Paul Sheehan each pled guilty to criminal trespass and received 18 months probation and community service. The remaining 5 members of the Knights of the Southern Cross pled out to misdemeanor trespass and got time served plus fines. Wayne Posey's farm was flagged by the ATF for the weapons cache found during a subsequent search, and Posey himself caught a federal charge for possessing unregistered destructive devices. He'd been making pipe bombs in his barn, a detail that elevated the entire case and brought federal attention to what had started as a local harassment campaign. But here's the detail that matters most, and most people never heard this part. During his sentencing hearing, Dale Ray Wiggins was asked by the judge if he had anything to say. Dale Ray stood up. He was thinner than he'd been 6 weeks in county lockup having that effect, and he looked at the judge and he said, "I made a mistake." The judge asked him to elaborate. Dale Ray was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I thought he was just a fat guy on a motorcycle." The courtroom didn't react. No gasps, no laughter. Just a hard silence that said more than any noise could have. That was the third and final time Dale Ray stated his core belief, at the moment of its complete and total failure. The judge gave Dale Ray his 4 years and told him that the next time he decided to terrorize someone based on how they looked, he should consider the possibility that appearances are the worst form of intelligence. Dale Ray was transported to Donaldson Correctional Facility. He served 27 months. When he got out, he moved to Mississippi. He never returned to Cullman County. And Bobby Dukes? Bobby fixed his Harley. Took him 3 weeks. New tank, new mirrors, new ignition. He tuned the engine until it sounded right. He adjusted the springs. He polished the chrome. On the first Saturday after the repairs were done, Bobby Dukes rode his Harley through downtown Cullman at 10 in the morning. 340 pounds of man and machine rolling down the main street at 35 miles an hour. And every person on the sidewalk who knew the story, and by then most of them did, stood and watched him pass. Nobody waved. Nobody cheered. This isn't a movie. People just watched. But the watching was enough. The watching was the town acknowledging that this man, this fat man on a motorcycle, had stood alone against 9 armed men and had won without violence, had won with preparation and discipline and the cold professional precision of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was and chose deliberately not to prove it with blood. Bobby rode to the rusty spur. He parked his bike where he could see it from the window. He walked inside and sat down at his usual spot. Donna brought him a Budweiser in a can. "Welcome back, Bobby." Bobby took the beer. He took a long drink. He set it down, and that was it. That was the legend. Not a man who killed. Not a man who conquered. A man who showed mercy to people who deserved none, because he'd already carried enough death for 1 lifetime, and he refused, absolutely, completely refused, to carry any more. The sniper who didn't shoot. The fat man who was never the prey. Bobby Dukes. Remember that name. The engine until it sounded right. He adjusted the springs. He polished the chrome. On the first Saturday after the repairs were done, Bobby Dukes rode his Harley through downtown Cullman at 10 in the morning. 340 pounds of man and machine rolling down the main street at 35 miles an hour, and every person on the sidewalk who knew the story, and by then most of them did, stood and watched him pass. Nobody waved. Nobody cheered. This isn't a movie. People just watched. But the watching was enough. The watching was the town acknowledging that this man, this fat man on a motorcycle, had stood alone against 9 armed men, and had won without violence, had won with preparation and discipline, and the cold professional precision of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was, and chose deliberately not to prove it with blood. Bobby rode to the rusty spur. He parked his bike where he could see it from the window. He walked inside and sat down at his usual spot. Donna brought him a Budweiser in a can. "Welcome back, Bobby." Bobby took the beer. He took a long drink. He set it down. And that was it. That was the legend. Not a man who killed, not a man who conquered. A man who showed mercy to people who deserved none because he'd already carried enough death for 1 lifetime, and he refused, absolutely, completely refused, to carry any more. The sniper who didn't shoot. The fat man who was never the prey. Bobby Dukes. Remember that name. But here's the thing about legends. They don't end when the story ends. They end when the world stops talking about them. And the world was not done talking about Bobby Dukes. Not by a long shot. Because what happened in Cullman didn't stay in Cullman. Word traveled. That's what word does in the South. It rides along the backs of conversations at gas stations and church potlucks and VFW halls. It hitches onto phone calls between cousins. It creeps into the places where men gather and talk about other men, the places where reputations are built or burned. And the version of the story that traveled was not always the version that happened. Some people said Bobby killed 2 of them in the dark and buried the bodies on his property. Some said he'd rigged the entire road with military-grade explosives, and the only reason Tully Brandt's crew survived was because Bobby let them. Some said he called in a favor from his old unit, and a team of snipers had been positioned in the hills the whole time. None of that was true. Believe me. The truth was simpler, quieter, and in a lot of ways more terrifying than any of those stories. The truth was that one man, working alone, had so completely dominated the tactical situation that 9 men with guns, fueled by hatred and whiskey and every advantage that numbers provide, had walked away with nothing. Not a single shot fired, not a single demand met, not a single inch of ground taken. That truth, the real truth, was harder for people to accept than the myths, because the myths made sense in the world people understood. Violence answered by violence. Force met with force. An eye for an eye. That's the arithmetic most folks are comfortable with. But a man who could have killed everyone and chose not to. A man who won by refusing the fight on their terms and rewriting the rules on his own. That made people uncomfortable. That made people think about what real strength actually looks like, and most people don't want to think that hard on a Tuesday afternoon. So the myths grew. And Bobby let them. He never corrected anyone. He never told his version of events to a reporter, or a podcast, or a buddy over beers. When someone brought it up at the Rusty Spur, he'd take a sip of his Budweiser and change the subject. When Donna once asked him directly, "Bobby, what really happened that night?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I fixed a problem." 3 words. That was all she ever got. Now, I need to tell you about what happened next, because this is where the story takes a turn that nobody, not Bobby, not the town, not even Tully Brandt rotting in his own humiliation 40 miles away, saw coming. It was 6 weeks after the standoff. Mid-November. The leaves were off the trees and the mornings had that bite to them, that cold that gets into your knuckles and stays there. Bobby was in his shop, working on a transmission for a '78 Chevy pickup that belonged to a farmer named Dale Griggs. Radio was on. Coffee was hot. Door was open because Bobby always kept the door open when he worked, said the fresh air kept his hands steady. A car pulled into the driveway. Black sedan, clean. Not a truck, not a beater, not the kind of vehicle you saw in rural Cullman County on a weekday morning. Bobby heard it before he saw it. He set down his wrench, wiped his hands on the rag that hung from his belt loop, walked to the shop door and leaned against the frame. 2 men got out, both wearing suits, both carrying themselves with that specific posture that said government or military or law enforcement. Spines straight, eyes moving, hands visible and deliberate. Get this. Bobby didn't tense up. He didn't reach for anything. He just watched them approach with the calm patience of a man who had been expecting this visit for a very long time, even if he didn't know exactly when it would arrive. The first man was tall, lean, early 50s, grey at the temples. He wore a navy suit and a tie that was loosened just enough to suggest he'd been driving for a while. The second man was younger, stockier, carrying a leather folder under his left arm. The tall one spoke first. "Robert Allen Dukes?" Bobby nodded. "My name is Harlan Webb. I'm a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. This is Agent Caruso. We'd like to talk to you about an incident that occurred on your property on October 3rd. Bobby looked at Webb, looked at Caruso, looked at the sedan. Then he looked back at Webb and said, "You want coffee?" Webb blinked, just once. Then he said, "Sure." Bobby turned and walked back into the shop, poured 2 cups from the pot on the workbench, handed one to Webb, one to Caruso. Then he leaned against the bench, crossed his arms over his chest, and waited. Webb took a sip. Good coffee. He set the cup down on the edge of the bench and said, "Mr. Dukes, we've received a complaint filed by a man named Tully Brandt alleging that you threatened him and 8 other individuals with a firearm on your property. He's also alleging that you're in possession of illegal military ordnance, including claymore mines and explosive booby traps. Those are federal offenses, and we're required to investigate. I swear this happened." Bobby Dukes heard those words and didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't uncross his arms. He just looked at Agent Webb with those steady, flat blue eyes and said, "Tully Brandt is a coward and a liar, and I think you already know that." Webb held Bobby's gaze. "We've looked into Mr. Brandt's background, yes. We're aware of his affiliations. But a complaint was filed, and I have a job to do. So I'm going to ask you directly, do you have any illegal weapons or explosives on this property?" Bobby uncrossed his arms. He put both hands flat on the workbench behind him. "I have a Remington 700, legally purchased. I have a 12-gauge Mossberg, legally purchased. I have a Colt 1911 that I've owned since 1973. All registered, all legal. I don't have claymores. I don't have booby traps. I don't have C4 or det cord or anything else that would make your paperwork more interesting. And the incident on October 3rd? 9 men came onto my property at night with guns and torches. I told them to leave. They left." Webb looked at Caruso. Caruso opened his leather folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He read from it without looking up. "Mr. Brandt's statement says, and I'm quoting, 'Dukes had the road wired with explosives and pointed a military sniper rifle at us from an elevated position. He said he would kill all of us if we didn't leave. He had laser sights on every vehicle.'" Bobby listened to every word. When Caruso finished, Bobby pushed off the workbench, walked to the shop door, and pointed at the driveway. "You see any craters? Any blast marks? Any evidence of explosives anywhere on that road?" Webb and Caruso both looked. The driveway was packed dirt and gravel, undisturbed, no scorching, no holes, no wires, nothing. Bobby turned back to them. "I'm a mechanic. I fix bikes and trucks. I served my country in Vietnam and I came home and I built a quiet life. 9 men decided to disrupt that life because of the color of my club patches and the size of my belly. They came looking for a victim. They didn't find one. That's the whole story. Here's the part that changed everything." Agent Webb set down his coffee cup, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a second piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it so Bobby could see it. It was Bobby's service record, not the abbreviated version, not the redacted version that most people would get through a standard records request. This was the real one, the full document, with unit designations and operational summaries and a medal count that would make a general's eyes water. Webb said quietly, "Sergeant First Class Robert Dukes, 1st Infantry Division, then attached to Mac V SOG for 2 tours of cross-border operations in Laos and Cambodia. Awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. Qualified expert marksman with confirmed operational distances exceeding 1,100 meters." Bobby's jaw tightened. That was all. Just the jaw. But that was everything. Because Bobby had spent 30 years burying that document, burying those operations, burying the things he'd done in jungles so dense you couldn't see the sky. And now a man in a suit was reading it aloud in his garage on a Wednesday morning, and the past was standing in the room with them, uninvited and unwelcome. Webb folded the paper, put it back in his pocket, and then he did something that Bobby did not expect. He extended his hand. I was in the Army myself. 82nd Airborne, 69 to 71. I know what MACVSOG was. I know what you did, and I know what it cost. Bobby looked at the hand. 5 seconds. 10. Then he reached out and shook it, 1 firm pump. Then he let go and stepped back. Webb's voice dropped. Not a whisper, but close. "Between you and me, Sergeant Dukes, Tully Brandt is a scumbag, and every agent in our field office knows it. He's been on our radar for 2 years. Illegal firearms sales, intimidation, Arson that we can't prove yet. The complaint he filed against you is garbage, and my report is going to say exactly that. No evidence of illegal ordnance, no evidence of criminal threatening. Case closed. Bobby didn't say thank you. He didn't nod or smile or exhale with relief. He picked up his wrench from where he'd left it on the bench and said, "Your coffee's getting cold." Webb almost laughed. Almost. He caught it in his chest and turned it into a nod. Then he picked up his coffee, drained it, and set the cup back down. "Good coffee, Sergeant." Bobby. If Brandt or anyone in his circle comes near you again, you call this number. Webb pulled a card from his wallet and set it on the workbench. Don't handle it yourself. Let us handle it. Bobby picked up the card, looked at it, put it in his shirt pocket. Appreciate it. Webb and Caruso walked back to their sedan. Caruso opened the driver's door, then stopped and looked back at Bobby, who was already bent over the Chevy transmission again, working like the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. Caruso said to Webb, low enough that he thought Bobby couldn't hear, "That guy took on 9 Klansmen by himself?" Webb opened the passenger door and looked at Bobby one more time. That guy could have taken on 90. They drove away. Bobby kept working. The radio played Merle Haggard. The coffee cooled. The November air came through the open door, and Bobby's hands moved with precision over the gears and bearings, and the world kept spinning like it always did, indifferent to the men who kept it turning. Now, you'd think that's the end. Agent shows up, clears Bobby's name, tells Brandt to pound sand. Credits roll, everybody goes home. But life doesn't roll credits. And Tully Brandt was not a man who accepted defeat. Trust me on this. I wish he was. I wish Brandt had taken the loss and retreated into whatever hole men like him crawl into when the world tells them they're done. But hatred is a fuel that doesn't run out. It doesn't care about logic or consequences or self-preservation. It just burns. And Brandt was burning. Word got back to Bobby 3 days before Thanksgiving. It came through Donna at the Rusty Spur, who'd heard it from her cousin's husband, who worked at a feed store in Good Hope, which was Brandt's territory. "Bobby." Donna put both hands on the bar and leaned forward. Her voice was tight. "Tully's talking again. He's telling people he's got something planned for your place, something big. He's saying it's going to happen on Thanksgiving night when everyone's inside with their families and nobody's watching." Bobby was halfway through his second beer. He set it down. "How many people has he told?" "Enough that it got back to me in 3 days." Bobby looked at his beer, looked at the window, looked back at Donna. A man who advertises his attack isn't planning an attack. He's trying to scare me into running. And if he's not bluffing? Bobby reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out Agent Webb's card. He set it on the bar. "Call that number. Tell him what you told me, everything. Names, dates, what your cousin's husband heard, all of it." Donna picked up the card. "Read it." Her eyebrows went up. "ATF? They're already watching Brandt. This gives them a reason to watch harder." Bobby finished his beer, put money on the bar, and stood up. He put one hand on Donna's shoulder. Not a grip, not a squeeze. Just a hand, resting there for a moment. "You're a good woman, Donna." "I mean that." She looked at his hand, then at his face. "You're not going to do anything stupid, are you?" "I've never done anything stupid in my life. That's a lie, and we both know it." He let his hand drop, walked to the door, stopped without turning around. "Call the number." He left. This is what most people don't understand about Bobby Dukes. This is the thing that separated him from every other tough guy in every other bar in every other small town in America. Bobby didn't fight battles. Bobby ended them. And there's a difference between those two things that most people never grasp, because they've never been in a position where the distinction matters. Fighting a battle means you engage, you meet force with force. You show up, you throw down, you see who's standing at the end. It's loud and it's bloody and it's what movies are made of. Ending a battle means you make the fight impossible. You remove the conditions that allow the fight to exist. You don't beat your enemy. You make your enemy irrelevant. Bobby had done it on his property with sound and light and the psychological weight of his own reputation. And now he was doing it again, but this time with a phone number and a federal agency that had been looking for an excuse to take Tully Brandt off the board. Donna called. I know this because she told the story later, many times to many people. She called Agent Webb's number that same afternoon. She told him everything. Webb listened, asked questions, took notes. And then he said, "Ma'am, I appreciate the call. We'll take it from here." 3 days later, on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a convoy of federal vehicles rolled into Good Hope, Alabama at 6 in the morning. ATF, FBI, county sheriff's deputies who'd been briefed and brought along as a courtesy. They had warrants, multiple warrants, for Tully Brandt's property, for his cousin's property, for a storage unit on Route 31 that was registered to a woman who turned out to be Brandt's sister-in-law. Now here's what nobody tells you. What they found had nothing to do with Bobby Dukes. Not directly. What they found was an arsenal. 47 illegally modified firearms, 12 of them fully automatic, 1,900 rounds of ammunition, 6 pipe bombs in various stages of assembly, 2 cases of dynamite that had been stolen from a mining operation in Walker County 8 months earlier, and documentation, handwritten logs, because Brandt was apparently too stupid to use a computer and too arrogant to keep his mouth shut, that tied him to 3 arsons, 2 armed robberies, and the firebombing of a black church in Blount County in 1991. Tully Brandt was arrested at his kitchen table. He was eating cereal, Fruit Loops, according to one of the deputies who was there. He didn't resist, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't do anything except sit there with a spoon in his hand and milk on his chin while federal agents put him in handcuffs and read him his rights. And that is how Bobby Dukes ended the war without firing a shot, without raising a fist, without stepping off his own property. He handed the fight to people whose job it was to fight it, and he went back to his shop and finished the transmission on Dale Griggs's Chevy pickup. Listen to me, I've told a lot of stories. Some of them are about men who punched their way through problems. Some are about men who outran their problems. Some are about men who were simply too mean or too crazy to be stopped by their problems. This one is different. This one is about a man who was all of those things, strong enough, fast enough, mean enough, crazy enough, and chose none of them. This is about a man who had more capacity for violence in his left hand than most people have in their entire lives, and who built a wall between himself and that violence brick by brick, day by day for 30 years, and who refused to let anyone, not 9 Klansmen, not a burning cross, not the ghost of every enemy he'd ever put in the ground, tear that wall down. Bobby Dukes spent Thanksgiving alone. Turkey sandwich, can of cranberry sauce, football on the television with the volume low. His dog, a half-blind basset hound named Sergeant, slept on the couch next to him. He didn't call anyone. Nobody called him. The phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent and still, and Bobby ate his sandwich and watched the game and scratched Sergeant behind the ears, and the house was quiet in the way that only a house occupied by a man who has made peace with his own solitude can be quiet. The next morning, Friday, he rode to the Rusty Spur. The parking lot was empty except for Donna's car. Bobby parked his Harley, walked inside, and sat down. Donna already had his beer waiting. She set it in front of him and said, "They got him. It's all over the news. Federal charges. He's not getting out." Bobby picked up the beer, took a sip, put it down. "Bobby." He looked at her. "It's over." He looked at his beer, looked at the door, looked at the spot on the wall behind the bar where a dartboard used to hang before someone put a cue ball through it in 1987. It was over the minute they drove onto my road. Donna opened her mouth to say something else. Then she closed it. Then she picked up a rag and started wiping down the bar, because some things don't need words, and she was smart enough to know the difference. Bobby drank 2 beers that morning. Then he went home and worked on his bike, adjusted the chain tension, checked the tire pressure, topped off the oil. He did these things slowly, methodically, with the care of a man who understood that maintenance was not about fixing what was broken, but about preventing what could break. That evening he sat on his porch. The sun went down behind the trees and the sky turned the color of a bruise, purple and gold and fading. Sargent lay at his feet, snoring. The road was empty, the air was cold, and Bobby sat there in his chair with his hands on his knees and looked out at the property he'd bought with money he'd earned fixing other people's machines, the property he'd defended without spilling a drop of blood, the property that was his and only his, and he breathed, just breathed, in and out, in and out, the way a man breathes when the war is finally over, and he knows it's over, and he doesn't have to pretend anymore. Now before I finish this, if you've been watching this far, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, because I promise you, the stories on this channel will keep hitting like this one, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let me tell you how this ends. Not the big ending, not the federal raid or the handcuffs or the look on Tully Brandt's face when he realized that the fat man on the motorcycle had beaten him without ever showing up. You already have that ending. That ending belongs to the world. This ending belongs to Bobby. It was a Sunday in December. Cold, clear sky. Bobby rode his Harley to a spot outside of town, a place where the road curved along a ridge and you could see for miles in every direction. Fields and trees and the faint blue line of the mountains to the north. He pulled over, killed the engine, sat there on the bike with his boots on the ground and looked out at the view. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a photograph, creased and faded and worn soft at the edges from years of handling. 4 men in jungle fatigues standing in front of a helicopter, young, thin, grinning at the camera with the reckless confidence of boys who did not yet understand that some of them would not come home. Bobby was on the far right, skinny, 21 years old, rifle over his shoulder, a smile on his face that would be unrecognizable to anyone who only knew him now. The man next to him was Jerome Washington. Jerome was from Detroit. He was funny and loud and terrified of spiders, and he could field strip an M16 blindfolded in under 40 seconds. Jerome died on Bobby's 3rd tour, in a valley whose name Bobby never learned to pronounce, from a wound that Bobby was too far away to prevent and too close to forget. Bobby looked at the photograph for a long time. His thumb traced the edge of Jerome's face. Then he folded the photograph carefully, put it back in his pocket, and buttoned the pocket closed. He started the bike. The engine turned over, clean and strong. He pulled back onto the road and headed home, 340 pounds of man and machine moving through the December air, and every rotation of the wheels carried him further from the things he'd done and closer to the thing he'd become. A man who chose mercy, a man who chose restraint, a man who had looked into the dark and found something there that most people never find. Not courage, not rage, not vengeance, but the understanding that the greatest weapon a dangerous man possesses is the decision not to use what he knows. Bobby Dukes lived in Cullman, Alabama for another 19 years after that night. He fixed motorcycles. He drank Budweiser at the Rusty Spur. He rode his Harley on Saturday mornings. He never married. He never joined another club. He never spoke about Vietnam unless someone who'd been there asked, and even then he said very little. He died in 2014. In his bed, in his house, with Sergeant III, he'd had 3 basset hounds all named Sergeant, sleeping on the floor beside him. Heart attack. Quick. The way he would have wanted it, if he'd wanted it at all. Donna closed the Rusty Spur the day of his funeral, hung a sign on the door that said gone to say goodbye to a friend. 47 people came to the service. Some of them were bikers, some of them were veterans, some of them were just people from town, who remembered the night 9 men came to Bobby's road, and 9 men left with nothing. Agent Harlan Webb came. He was retired by then. He drove from Huntsville in a pickup truck, wore a dark suit, and stood in the back of the chapel with his hands folded in front of him. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. At the graveside, after the pastor finished, Donna walked up to the casket. She put her hand on the polished wood. She didn't cry. She just stood there for a moment, her palm flat against the surface, and then she said, quiet enough that only the people closest to her could hear, "You were the best man I ever knew, Bobby Dukes. And I don't think you ever believed that." She stepped back. The casket went into the ground. People left. The cemetery emptied. The wind picked up and moved through the bare trees and across the headstones and out over the fields toward the ridge where Bobby used to park his bike and look at the mountains. And somewhere in the county records, in a file cabinet that nobody opens, there is a complaint filed by a man named Tully Brandt, alleging that a fat man on a motorcycle threatened him with military weapons. The complaint was investigated and dismissed. Brandt himself served 11 years in federal prison and died of liver failure in a halfway house in Birmingham in 2009, 5 years before the man he'd tried to terrorize. Bobby outlived him, not because Bobby was stronger or luckier or meaner, but because Bobby had something Brandt never had and never would have, a reason to keep going that wasn't built on hate. Bobby's reason was simple. He wanted to fix things. Engines, transmissions, carburetors, the small mechanical problems of ordinary people who needed their machines to work so their lives could work. That was enough. For 30 years, that was enough. And the legend. The legend of the fat Hell's Angel who was really a Union sniper, the man the Klan hunted as a joke and discovered was the most dangerous person they'd ever met. That legend lives. It lives in the Rusty Spur, which reopened 3 days after Bobby's funeral under new management but kept his stool at the end of the bar, with a small brass plate that reads "Reserved." It lives in the stories veterans tell each other in VFW halls across North Alabama. It lives in the memory of 9 men who drove onto a dark road full of confidence and drove off it full of something they'd never felt before and never wanted to feel again. What happened on that road became Cullman legend, a story whispered about for decades. And I just told it to you. Bobby Dukes. 340 pounds. Budweiser in a can. A Remington 700 he never had to fire. The deadliest man in the county. The gentlest man in the room. Remember that name.